So one of the things we're going to go through, target selection and prioritisation of different targets to help you work out what to go for. Weapon selection, ingress route planning, IP selection, attack planning, egress planning, contingency planning, which is all the other stuff, and then a few sort of flight planning methods that I use to work out how to get my way to the target and back again. Obviously, the main way I've geared this up is for combat scenario. So there's going to be nothing in here that's NTTR specific. However, that said, if anyone has got an NTTR specific question, by all means feel free to ask. So right, target selection then. Start with the meat of it. So yeah, the main thing that sort of I want to focus on and get people thinking about is the actual role of the aircraft itself. Specifically for us at the moment, the A10. So yeah, ground attack aircraft. So your main role is to attack enemy ground forces in support of friendly forces. So either forces in depth behind the forward line of enemy troops before they can present a threat to friendly forces. So think air interdiction sorties, or directly in support of friendly forces. Be it troops in contact or in close proximity to friendly forces, which is your CAS type scenarios. Air interdiction sorties, mostly pre-planned. You know what target you're going to hit before you take off, and CAS missions are generally a mix of pre-planned sort of things and your on-call CAS scenarios, FAT control, JTAC control type stuff. One of the other things that you'll find, not so much in the missions that we fly, but certainly when you start doing things, we're operating with the way that 132nd have done things in the past, and we might start doing it over time, is AWACS and tactical command and control agencies tasking flights en route. So similar to the way FACA's JTAC works, but without all the 9-line stuff. It'll literally be, here's something, go kill it kind of types. So they're sort of the main things that can happen. So target prioritisation itself then, and the way you work it, again, a way, not necessarily the way. Specifics of a given operation may differ. So for example, Operation Georgian Storm, the target prioritisations might be different to a different scenario, for example the one Tex is making, depending on what the the storyline of the mission is. So from top to bottom, generally speaking, your most vital targets are your artillery and MLRS units. They're the things that are going to present the most threat to friendly ground forces, and that's what it's all about. Again, just to drive home that point. It's not about what is most dangerous to you in your A10. It's about what is most dangerous to the guys on the ground that you're there to support. So then you've got your tanks, your main battle tanks, armored units, mechanized forces. So your infantry with your infantry fighting vehicles, BMPs, that kind of thing. Mechanized forces again with your APCs, so lighter armour. I think your BTR-80s, BRDMs, that kind of stuff. Motorised forces, now you're onto your soft-skinned, your trucks, your UAZs, that sort of stuff. Dismounted infantry, and then your support units, your engineers, your logistics units, driving supplies and around the AO. And then lastly, air defences. Air defences, obviously there's a couple of caveats to that. Things like the Zeus can engage ground forces, so they may sort of come bracket into them, sort of mix in with the armoured forces, so they might be worth taking out for that purpose. But air defences, their purpose is to stop you engaging your target. So if you spend all your ordnance engaging air defences and then don't take out your target, well then you've not done your job. Again, so AI and CAS sorties, it's the needs of the friendly ground forces that are the main priority driver. It's not a case of, this target, this air defence unit is a threat to us, so we're going to kill it. Well, if you have to, you have to, but most cases what you want to do is get around that, or under it, over it, so that you can engage what you're really worried about. And again, as I sort of started off with, it's not for this, this isn't a fundamental, authoritative list. It's just a general overview that fits most scenarios, but things may vary. Right, so general targeting considerations then. Again, one of the things that you'll find is, certainly with the combat scenarios we do, those of you who've been around long enough to fly OGS will obviously remember it, but the way we operate in the 476 with targeting, there's a number of options you can get to how you get a target. So the easiest one for most people is obviously the ATO assigned target. You know, somebody comes along, you know, as part of a flight night planning, whatever it is, you know, as part of the briefing for a mission, and says, you are going to go and kill this target. You know, that takes most of the work away from you. You're then, okay, that's my target, this is what I'm going to do. The other option is ATO assigned location or area, so think kill boxes. You know, mission is go to this location, kill anything you find. Again, relatively simple. Then you've got your on-station tasking, so your JTAC, FAC-A type missions. Again, you know, you fly up to a position pre-briefed, sit there and wait for someone else to tell you what to kill. Again, relatively simple. Where it starts to get more complex, I think, for a lot of people, is where, you know, you're left to your own devices to go and find your target. You know, you've got the briefing, you know, the Google Earth plugin, you know, the documentation that says the enemy are around here. You know, here's what they're made up with. Here's the order of battle. Yeah, the priorities for the mission are this. Off you go. Which is what obviously OGS tended to be. And the two options you get there is either pilot selected group, so you know you engage a specific group of enemy forces, or a location area, so you know you say I'm going to go and fly to Poti and kill everything I can see around Poti. So to expand on those then, yeah, assigned group, so specific groups assigned as part of an ATO frag. No further selection activities are likely to be necessary. So yeah, you basically head there, fly and kill your targets. There's no need to plan for targets of opportunity, that kind of thing. Sorry, is that someone breaking in with a question? No? Okay. Right, so the target group, you're going to know that from the outset. You know, so your planning really is going to focus on the threat picture at the target. You know, minimising the abilities of any threat systems that are there to engage you while you're in that target area. Obviously, if you know, for example, that there is an SA-6 battery, you know, 10 miles northwest of your target, you know, therefore, that you're going to be at target. You're going to be within the WES of that threat group. So obviously, you can then, you know, tailor your tactics, tailor your weapon configurations, etc., to mitigate that threat. If you don't know what threats are present, then what you're looking at is what's the order of battle. You know, what does the enemy have, and then, you know, if you know, for example, they've got Zeus's, they've got SA-9s, they've got SA-13s, they've got SA-19s, well then the safest thing to do is assume that all that stuff is there unless you know for sure it isn't, and you plan based on that. Location, assigned location or area, basically the same kind of thing. The only difference is you're not necessarily going to know what is there. So, you know, whereas previously you might know you're going to engage a T-80, you know, battalion, now you're not going to necessarily know what you're going to engage because you're not going to know what's there until you get there. So in this case, what you're looking at is order of battle. What does the enemy have? What, you know, there's no point in gearing yourself up to engage T-90s, for example, if, you know, the most heavy armour the enemy has got is a BMP-2. You know, so look at what the enemy has available to them, and then, you know, make some planning assumptions based on that. Again, same with threats. You know, you're not going to know what's there for the most part. You know, you might have some intelligence on, you know, certainly large level, you know, your MIRAD, LORAD threats, but for the most part, your tactical air defences, you're not going to know about it. So you assume it's going to be there. You know, always assume manpads are present unless you know otherwise. Always assume AAA is present unless you know otherwise, and sort of, you know, gear things up around that. Okay, any questions so far? Good. Right. So, on call, on station taskings then, again, this is where we're dealing with FAC-As, JTACs, etc. So, the main focus here is, again, it's going to that order of battle. What does the enemy have? What could I be asked to engage? You know, if, you know, you're looking at a counterinsurgency type scenario and all you're dealing with is guys with T-towels on their heads with AK-47s, then there's no point in carrying CBU-97. You know, things like that. There's no point in planning that kind of thing, that kind of weaponry into the situation. You know, you're not going to be dealing with, you know, heavy air defences, so don't, you know, plan for massive chaff loads, ECM, things like that. So what you're focusing there on is, you know, making sure first and foremost you've got enough fuel to meet your time on station. You know, if you're given a 1 hour time on station as part of the brief, well then you need to make sure that you've got. Oh, hang on, what's going on here? I've lost the presentation. One sec. It's all gone weird. There we go. There we go. Can you see it again?
Yep.
Excellent. Right, so yeah, sorry, right, remind myself where I was. Yeah, so you're looking at, okay, I've got a 60-minute time on station, you know, I'm going to have fuel for 90 minutes. Okay, good. Payload, you know, look at a payload that gives you a reasonable ability to engage the possible targets that could be present. You know, again, look at the order of battle. What does the enemy have? What could I be facing? What could that forward air controller ask me to engage? And plan for that. Obviously, you know, you may have the option to, you know, liaise with that FAC in advance as part of the planning process, you know, or whatever. So, you know, try and get as much intel as you can on what, you know, is going to happen, what's going to be expected of you, so you can plan for it. If, you know, the part of the ATO is that FAC is, okay, forward air controller, you are going to be engaging targets in this area, and here's what's there. Well, then you can obviously from that make a good assessment of what, you know, you're going to be asked to engage. You know, if the FAC's tasking is to engage, you know, enemy armour, you know, outside POTI, well then you know what you're going to be asked for as a strike pilot. If there's none of that, again, it's just ATO. What could I theoretically be asked to engage? Plan for that. When it comes to things like air refuelling, that kind of thing, there's obviously a lot of options that you can do. You know, air refuelling on the way to the target. You know, spend 30 minutes on station, off station, refuel, back on station again, that kind of thing. Or, you know, if you've got a low threat environment, one of the other options is, one thing that quite often used to happen in Afghanistan, for example, is, you know, there's two ship. One jet will go to the tanker, refuel, while the other one stays on station, and then they just swap it round and just keep doing that. You know, so there's always one guy on station and one guy, you know, getting topped off with fuel, etc. So, you know, you can plan all those variable options in depending on the scenario. Right, when we get to sort of more complicated stuff then, so the pilot selected groups, yeah, generally it's the most complex for a lot of people, because it basically is putting all the responsibility on the flight lead and, you know, wingman to plan the entire sortie from start to finish. So, you know, you start off looking at the map essentially and going, right, what's a good target? You know, what's a target that's important and useful for me to kill as part of the, you know, the mission aim. You know, if, you know, for example, as part of, use OGS again as an example, Georgian Storm, you know, you've got, you know, the mission objective at that time is to, you know, engage enemy forces around Kutaisi to let friendly forces push through. Well, then that's where you start. You know, you look at starting, okay, engaging these groups around Kutaisi is what I need to do. What have we got around there? Okay, well, there's an air defence group there, there's an armoured group there, there's an artillery group there. Well, I can get to that artillery group without having to, you know, kill myself in the process, so I'm going to make that my target. You know, just go down that priority list, but be realistic about it. You know, if there is an artillery group which is, you know, priority number one target, but it's protected by an SA-10, an SA-11, two SA-6s and 100 manpads, probably not worth going after it with a two ship.
Maybe a single ship.
Yeah. So, you know, again, look at target priority listing. You know, known ground force objectives. Quite often, as part of the mission briefing, you'll get, as I said before, one of the things I tend to do is say, you know, okay, the friendly ground forces within the next 24 hours are going to be aiming to, you know, advance on this position. So, you know, our job as the A-10s is to go in there and try and get rid of as much resistance as we can beforehand. You know, to look at that. Overall command objectives, you know, the top layer, so above that, you know, over the next, you know, 2 days, 3 days, our objective is to, you know, advance as far as Senaki, for example. Okay, so we're going to start sweeping all the way towards that. And then you're looking at things like proximity to friendly forces, so obviously the groups that are closest to friendly forces, you want to engage first. Then, as I say, proximity to ground force command objectives. So, you know, if you say, okay, we're going to engage Kutaisi, you've got a group of armour 20 miles north of Kutaisi, and then, you know, a group of light infantry on Kutaisi. Well, it probably makes sense to engage that group on Kutaisi first. And then lastly is the threat environment. You know, obviously, as I said, you know, no point in trying to engage a target that's surrounded by, you know, a myriad of air defences that you can't possibly get through in an A-10. You know, generally speaking, at the moment, certainly in missions, if you see that kind of environment where you think, there's no way I can get through that with all that air defences there, well, that's probably because you're not meant to. You know, it's one of the things I have always tended to do is put, you know, heavy air defences that A10s can't get through in places where I don't want A10s going. Obviously, in the long term, once we start getting other aircraft and we can start doing sea capabilities, stuff like that, we can start dealing with that a bit better. And then pilot selected locations, areas. Again, this is where we're dealing kill boxes. The town of Poti, the town of Kobuleti, that kind of thing. Pretty much the same scenario as pilot selected individual targets, but now you're going after a geographic location. This is probably one of the easiest to plan for, and one of the things that people tend to go for most, I would say, in like the DS combat scenarios, because you go on the map. Okay, I know the enemy are in this area. This is where the forward line of enemy troops is. I'm going to pick that bit of the map, and I'm going to fly there and kill whatever I find. And that's one of the easiest scenarios. As I say, that scenario, you're basically looking at any intel you've got that tells you what might be there, order of battle, what could be there, air defences, what do you know is there, what could be there, and the other thing obviously is one thing, again, for those that haven't been around enough to know it, is one thing we do with combat sorties, every time pilot flight goes up, when they come back, you write a quick debrief on the forum to say, this is what we saw, this is what we killed, this is what's left in this area. So again, you go through those and say, okay, well, these guys were here yesterday, and there was an SA-13 battery, just north. Okay, so we'll consider that. So a little bit less, planned, if if I can use that term, then I best to sort of describe it. But a little bit less pre-planned and a little bit more on the fly. But that's the nature of DCS. Unfortunately, we don't have all the intel and planning assets that we perhaps should do. Okay, any questions on that so far? Right, making sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right then, so on to aircraft config and weaponeering then. And so I'm going to try and fly through these, and then we'll sort of get towards the end and start throwing a bit more questions up and stuff like that. Right, so config and weaponeering then. Weapon selection. Again, I think this is one of those areas that people, I don't know if some people tend to struggle with or not. I know some people do. I think we're pretty good, within the group for it. But there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to choosing your payload selection. One of the problems we have with the A10 is you've got a million weapon stations, a million different weapons that you can put on these weapon stations, and it becomes very easy for people to just take everything in the world and then end up with a jet that flies like a bus. It just doesn't work. So when you're looking at your weapon selection, again, I'm not going to read everything on the slide because you guys can read it faster than I can say it. But a lot of things to consider. Obviously target types. What have you got there? Is it heavily defended? Is it lightly defended? Is it armoured? Is it not armoured? The threat environment. What sort of threat environment are you dealing with? Are you dealing with long range air defence units, just like AAA? Are you dealing with an air threat? Because obviously that's going to dictate your tactics. If you're dealing with an air threat and that's pushing you down to low level, well then there's no point in taking JDAMs, for example. That kind of thing. Employment envelope, obviously that goes in kind of hand in hand with the threat environment. Are you low level, medium level? Are you wanting to do a standoff attack because of the threat environment? Is it a single pass, get out as quick as possible, or is it a lower threat so you can do multiple passes on the target, that kind of thing? Timing, time on target. Have you got a specific time on target that you have to comply with? Are you part of a larger package that's saying, okay, you have to hit your target at exactly 15:30, and that's it, and then you've got 5 minutes. Again, if that's the case, there's no point in carrying weapons that are going to take you 15 minutes to get rid of if you've only got 5 minutes on target. Time on station, again, kind of goes hand in hand. Have you got a limited time over the target area to, deal with? Have you got to be on station for a given amount of time? As part of a cast scenario, no point in carrying, a large sort of heavy draggy payload that's going to reduce your your range and your endurance if you need to be on station for an hour and a half. And obviously, coordination with other flights. Are you going to have to coordinate the attacks with other aircraft? Multiple aircraft attacking a target, that kind of thing. So again, if you've only got one pass to get your weapons off and then get out before someone else comes in, no point in carrying a weapon on every station that you can't get off. Restrictions, obviously, rules of engagement. You might have restrictions saying that you can't use CPUs in built-up areas. Standard rules for us. You can't use combat mix. You can't do this. You can't do that. So again, something to bear in mind. And obviously, weapon availability as well. There's no point planning to use a JDAM if there aren't any at your airfield, for example. Contingencies. Think about your secondary target. Secondary target's there obviously in case you can't attack your primary target for any reason. So there's no point again in going up for taking a payload that allows you to engage your primary target but doesn't allow you to engage your secondary. So consider that. And jettison criteria. I put this in here a couple of times just to sort of start hammering this point home. But if you're engaged by an air defense unit, like long range SAM, if you're engaged by enemy fighters and you have to hit the emergency jettison and get rid of all your external stores, can you still engage the target gun only? Is that ability there, or are you just going to abort and head home at that point? And yeah, I've duplicated those two, so ignore them. Obviously, a point that I think most people here are happy with, but just to hammer it home, payload, minimising weight and drag. Drag especially in the A10, we've got it's so underpowered. You don't want to be slowing it down any more than you need to.
Especially when there is a SAM nearby.
Indeed. Yes, basically the idea is only the weapons necessary to actually effectively engage the target, and I want to emphasise that point as well. Effectively engage. That doesn't mean wipe out 100% of the vehicles that are down there, because that may not be effective. That may be what you're tasked to do, but equally, in most cases, if you take half or 2/3 of an enemy group out, it ain't going to be much use in combat anymore. You've done your job. So if you've got 10 units, you take out 7. There's no point in putting yourself in harm's way for an extra 5 minutes to take out the last 3. And yeah, air interdiction missions, obviously, as much tailoring as possible for that specific task. CAS missions, obviously, as we've already covered, do require a little bit of extra flexibility, and you might need to carry ordnance that you may end up not using, just to make sure you've got that full selection and full ability to engage any target that could theoretically come up. So yeah, as I say, we've got an awful lot of weapons available. It's important not to carry stuff just in case, though. Don't start loading the aircraft up as much as you can just to do it. And look at the capabilities of the aircraft we've got. The A10, the GAU-8. It is in terms of range performance, it's second only to the Maverick for us. We can engage targets with that gun out to 2, maybe even 3 miles, depending on whether it's soft-skinned or not. Potentially even further if it's infantry, for example. So make use of that. Don't go thinking, oh, I'm going to carry all these Mark 82s and then fly over the target, when you can just sit there at 2 miles with a gun and take them out at range. Using a gun-only jet on a lot of missions, especially low-level missions where you need the manoeuvrability and the speed, is very useful. Don't carry stuff you don't need to. Use that 1100 rounds you've got inside the jet that doesn't produce any drag at all to do the job. Maverick, obviously, yeah, it is a primary weapon system, but it isn't mandatory. You don't have to carry Mavericks. If taking just the gun and a couple of Mark 82s will do the job, well then that's all you need to carry. Don't think that you've got to stick a Maverick on 3 and 9 just because, well, that's what you always do. And obviously, just because Maverick's there doesn't mean other weapons aren't going to be more effective. Sometimes, especially if you're dealing with soft-skinned targets, for example, bombs, CBUs are going to be more effective than Mavericks, so use them.
Gun even.
Indeed. Sometimes carrying 6 JDAMs, for example, is a more effective payload than 4 JDAMs and 2 Mavericks. And obviously, the precision engagement capabilities of the aircraft, that was what the C model was all about. Adding that sort of precision engagement capability, your JDAMs, your paveways, etc., to the A10. So while a lot of what we tend to do is low-level, LATN type missions, that's because that kind of needs a bit more practice than your medium-level JDAM and paveway pickling. Don't think that means you can't use those JDAMs and those paveways. in a combat scenario. If the mission allows you to get up to medium level safely and sit there at 16,000 feet, then by all means do it. It is in a lot of cases safer. Right, any questions on that then? Anyone got any points they want to add, thoughts they want to put out there?
Yeah.
Go on.
So especially when we're talking like soft skin targets and your soft skin or hard skin targets and your weapons available under the wing. So that's, Eddie was just saying, hey, you're gonna actually plan around the target area, so you're gonna bring the weaponeering depending on what's down there, what your intent on killing, and all of a sudden you actually see that there's a mix of vehicles. And yes, you're also gonna think about, hey, I'm not gonna waste a Maverick on a fucking Humvee. No, that would be a waste of Maverick. A gun can just easily do the job on that Humvee.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way you think, eh?
Yeah, indeed. Well, I will say, just because a Maverick versus a truck is a bit of a overpowering sort of weapon employment, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong either. If that using a Maverick against the truck allows you to take out that truck safely without putting yourself in harm's way, well, then it's a valid method, obviously.
Yeah, that was another thing I wanted to point out.
Stupid question. How do you choose your secondary? By convenience, the easiest target for you, or?
Yeah, basically, what you're looking at for a secondary target is a target that is far enough away from your primary, such that if there is an unexpected air defense unit at your primary target that stops you getting to it, you've still got somewhere you can go and somewhere that you can do good without just scrubbing the whole mission. That's kind of what you're after. So you don't want a primary target and then a secondary target 1 mile away from it, because then if you can't hit your primary, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to hit your secondary either. It's basically that sort of, it's a secondary, not a second target, I think is the main sort of point to get across. You're not generally going to hit your primary and your secondary on your mission. It's going to be one or the other.
Okay.
So the idea is, if for any reason, say enemy fighters pop up and you have to run away in a different direction, and then, you just want to get in and do something useful to get the weapons off the jet, the secondary target, that's what it's there for.
Right.
Hey, Eddie, on jettison criteria, is that ever part of mission planning, like in the briefing? Or I haven't been in MQT yet to read the contract, but is that always up to the individual pilot?
That should be something that's briefed. So, for example, again, it's something I was going to go on to later on, really, but yeah, we can brief about it now, absolutely. Essentially, what you're looking at is it's pre-briefing as part of that mission. If this happens, we will jettison our stores.
Okay.
So it's rather than the flight lead having to say, okay, jettison now, it's right, if we get engaged by enemy fighters, or say for example, if enemy fighters are hot on us at 10 miles or closer, we jettison stores. If you get fired at by a SAM, you jettison stores. If you are engaged by 3 AAA units simultaneously, you jettison stores. It's that kind of thing.
Okay.
The other thing you can also do is brief, for example, if we are engaged, if we have fighters closing within 20 miles, we'll jettison the Mark 82s and keep the Mavericks, so selective jet to lighten the aircraft, increase your speed, maneuverability, etc. There's other things like that you can do. So it varies a lot depending on, what your payload is, what your target is, what the threat environment is. But I think it's something that certainly, in DCS people tend to neglect, certainly in the A10. But if you think sort of the fighter mindset, the first thing you do when you're fired at by anything is external tanks go bye-bye. And it's the same with air-to-surface ordnance. If you're engaged in that air-to-air fight, the external stores should be going, because keeping them reduces your chance of winning. The same if you're up at medium altitude and you're defending an SA-10, for example. Well, guess what? Those stores are now not a good thing; they're a bad thing. Get rid.
Mm-hmm. It's in a way it's a situation thing, It's something that you can actually just pre-brief, like foreseeable things that might happen, But other than that, you know, if all of a sudden you get jumped by, I don't know, a fighter, then yeah.
Yeah, that's it. The whole idea is to brief all these contingencies, as part of the mission. They may not happen. You hope they don't happen, but you brief them anyway, so that if they do, everyone knows what to do. And that's the point. If everyone already knows what to do, you don't have to waste time in the mission talking about it. Because as a lot of people attest, that have done work with the 65th, aggressors so far, is when a fighter comes after you, it happens very quickly. You don't have a lot of time to think about it. So pre-briefing all that stuff in advance, helps. Likewise, when a SAM shoots at you, well, that missile's coming at you at Mach 3. You haven't got a lot of time to think about what it is you're going to do and work it out on the fly. So you've got to know what you're going to do in advance. Does that make sense?
Okay, very good.
Yep.
Sweet. Okay then, so, ingress planning. So we're in the air, we're heading towards the target, and we're now wanting to get there and actually kill stuff. So, a lot of things to consider, a lot of options. Again, nothing is absolute, but some points out to sort of start prompting some thoughts into your head, really. Range. What are the main considerations, really? Especially in the A10 where we don't have external tanks in combat, so the only options we've got is internal fuel and or air refueling. So how far have you got to fly? How far is the target? And it's not just the question of the target is 300 miles away from my airbase, it's how far do I have to fly to get to my target? If it's a low threat environment and you can fly a pretty straight line from home plate to target, well great, it makes life easy. If, however, you've got to do low altitude tactical navigation, going around hillsides, through ridges, down valleys, etc., and you've actually got to fly, 400 miles, well then, that starts to be a problem, and you're starting to think, okay, I have to refuel, to get there and get back. So that's where you need to sort of start adding that stuff in, or potentially you'd have to sort of think, well, I can't hit that target, I've got to hit something else. Threat environment, obviously that's going to heavily influence what your ingress routes and what your ingress tactics are going to be. If you've got enemy fighters, are they on cap? Are they ground alert intercepts? Have they got GCI? Have they got AWACS? That kind of thing. Enemy surface-based air defences. Are you dealing with long-range air defence systems like the SA-10? Are you dealing with medium-range systems, SA-11s, SA-6s, SA-3s? Are you dealing with short-range air defence systems alone? 8s, 15s, 19s, your 9s and your 13s, or are you dealing with AAA, or are you dealing with a mix of all of them? That's going to affect what you're doing. If you're dealing with fighters and air defences, well then now you have to look, okay, where the air defences are and where their threats, plot where their threat circles are going to be, and try and thread your way through them. Be it just by staying out their range or using terrain to mask you. If with the fighters, are you actually better off staying at medium altitude, or do you want to get as low to the ground as possible to try and sneak past them? Have you got other friendly assets that are going to be supporting you? So onto the timing sort of subject. Are you part of a larger package? Are you wanting to keep that package relatively close together in the sky so that you present a bigger threat to anything that's coming after you? Are you wanting to split that package up on different routes to try and surprise the enemy and overwhelm the enemy? Have you got forward air controllers to coordinate with, so that you need to make sure they're on station before you get there? Have you got a fighter sweep that's going ahead of you to sweep, to get rid of any caps that are up there? And do you want to come in, far enough behind them so that you're not being engaged by anything they're dealing with, but also not so far behind that enemy fighters have had a chance to get in the air and replace what's been taken out? Have you got an escort that you're flying with? Are you going to have to plan your route such that fighters can, stay within proximity of you to escort you? Target combat air patrol. If you've got a target combat air patrol and then you've got fighters sitting there overhead while you're engaging the target, is that going to affect, again, what time you've got to get there, how you've got to get there, have you got to arrive from a specific direction so they don't engage you, that kind of stuff. And obviously your seed. If you've got a seed escort, or a seed strike going in advance, again, timing, where they're coming from, all that kind of stuff. Are they going to be waiting for you to get to a specific point before they start doing their job, that kind of thing. Coordination with ground forces, obviously thinking CAS here, is it a case where you're doing a pre-planned CAS sortie that is, the friendly ground forces want you to take out a enemy group, 5 minutes before they start an advance, for example. Plan that in. And obviously coordination with other packages. Have you got a package going to hit a target, nearby yours, and they're coming in from the east and they want you to come in from the west so you don't conflict with each other, that kind of thing. And then obviously, lastly, is restrictions, so ROE limitations and routing requirements. Is there a specific route or corridor that you have to follow in and out of the target, such that friendly fighters don't engage you? That kind of thing. Right. Any thoughts, comments, questions on Ingress? Okay, so IP selection then. Okay, I think this is one of those things that quite a few people have asked questions about. How you choose an IP, what it should be, this, that, and the other. Obviously, IP, your initial point, so the point from which your attack begins, essentially, is how it works. So you get to your IP, and then the very next point you're headed to is your target. So on the route from your IP to your target is where you are, using sensors if applicable to get on the target, to aim weapons. It's where you're doing your weaponeering. It's where you're potentially jinking around enemy air defences, that kind of thing. So with that in mind, the IP wants to be far enough away from the target that you've got enough time to employ the weapon effectively, but not so far that you're sitting there flying for 5 minutes before you get in range to start employing that weapon, doing your weaponeering. So the distance for your IP to target is going to vary depending on what weapons you're using and what the target is. So for example, if you're using Mavericks, 8 miles, maybe 6 miles is about right. If you're using Mark 82s, well, 3 or 4 miles is probably enough. The other things to consider, are you going to have action points in between the IP and the target? So, say you're doing a wedge bombs, that kind of thing. Make sure your IP is positioned such that you've got time to manoeuvre the formation, how you need to manoeuvre it for the attack. You could have different IPs, so you could have an IP for 1, an IP for 2, an IP for 3, an IP for 4. That's quite often what tends to happen in sort of the fighter strike world. Not so much for A10s, but there's no reason you couldn't do it. Then the other thing is, make sure it's outside of any known threats. There's no point in planting your IP right in the middle of a threat circle for an SA6, because that's going to ruin your day. But obviously, that said, bear in mind, threat circles really are three-dimensional. You can be under the threat circle, you can be, terrain mass from the threat circle, you can be, above the threat circle. So, factor that into your thoughts, your planning as well. The other thing that you want to do, where if at all possible, is plan your IP such that it is an easily recognisable feature, geographic feature, when you look outside the canopy. And the reason being, if you're sat there, at 300 feet, zipping along at 300 knots or even more in other aircraft, you don't want to be worrying about, okay, I'm now 0.5 miles away from the waypoint, I'm going to pull up now, or any of that kind of stuff. You want to be looking, right, there's the bridge, go. That kind of thing. There's the crossroads, I'm in the right place. It's much easier. It keeps your head outside of the canopy. So at the same time as you're looking for the IP, you're also looking for threats. You're also able to pick up a missile trail if a SAM comes up. You're able to see traces from AAA. You're able to spot that fighter that's coming at you. That kind of thing. That said, if no such position is available, like for example you are in the middle of a featureless desert, you can use a systems-only IP. You can use a grid ref. You don't have to use a geographic point, but it is far more effective if you can use a geographic point. Obviously, the other few points, as I said, obviously, terrain masking, if applicable. Try and choose your IP such that it's masked from the target, so that you can approach the IP unseen, and then from the IP to the target, you're in, you're gone, you're doing your job, and you're out as quick as possible. Ability to hold. Are you going to be in a position where, for example, one's going to run in and then two's going to have to hold for an orbit at the IP? If that's the case, we'll make sure it's in environment, in terrain where that is possible. There's no point having the IP in a valley and then asking two to do a racetrack orbit. It's not going to work. Abort options, if you get to the IP and such happens, if there happens to be air threat at the IP, are you going to have a backup IP? Is that something you want to plan as part of your contingency, or are you just going to, at that point, assume, mission abort, or are you going to assume, we'll just make up an IP on the fly? And as I mentioned before, action points, if they're needed between the IP and the target, brief those out as well. Right, questions, comments, thoughts on IPs? Okay. Right then, so attack planning. Again, this one, it's one of those areas where there's a lot of variance to it. It's going to, depend massively on the type of target, what threats are there, what threats are around the target, air threats, surface threats, what kind of surface threats, what kind of air threats, as to what exactly you're going to do. Also, the number of targets that are there. So, for example, if you're dealing with an armoured group that's four T80s, or you're dealing with an armoured group that's 12 T80s, your attack planning is going to have to factor that in. What weapons you're using and the capabilities of those weapons. For example, if you're using a Maverick and you want to be, obviously have enough of an altitude to get a decent angle on the target to be able to get the lock, then that's going to factor into how you're going to do your attack. And the capabilities of the aircraft as well. A-10, we know what it can do, but other aircraft may be different. One of the key points I always like to stress is, always perform only the minimum number of attacks necessary to effectively engage the target. So as I said before, back at the start, effectively, that doesn't mean wipe it out just because you can. Do what you need to do. If you're there engaging a armoured group with 10 T80s and 3 Zeuses, well, take down the 10 T80s, leave the Zeuses. All of a sudden there's no point in those Zeuses being there, they'll go somewhere else.
Yep.
Remember, air defence is there to defend the stuff it's with, it's not there for its own purpose.
Also, per se, that's same situation is you have an artillery and you have a support vehicles nearby. You take out 4 artillery pieces, and those support vehicles you can leave them be because they serve no other purpose anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's something else I was going to mention as well. So, if you've got an artillery battery, that's consisting of, I don't know, say an MLRS battery with 6 BM21s, you take out those 6 BM21s, the 5 or 6 trucks that are there, well, whatever. They're trucks. They don't present a threat to friendly ground forces. If you're going to drop a CBU on them and they happen to die, well, so be it. Great. But don't, spend time over target, in harm's way to take them out when you don't need to. So, ultimately, focus on the actual objective that you've set, either that you set yourself or that you've been set, and plan to achieve it. Plan the minimum number of attacks, the most aggressive attacks as well a lot of the time. Don't sort of sit there, from 20 miles out, flying in and dropping 1 GBU-12 and then coming back and back to 20 miles away and then doing it again and taking half an hour, when you can have 2 aircraft coming from 2 different directions, drop, 2 sticks of Mark 82s and wipe the group out. When it comes to, low level versus medium level, again, it's driven by the threat environment. So if the threat environment pushes you down to low level, that obviously means you're then looking at your low altitude wedge bombs, low altitude, gun deliveries, that kind of thing to take down the target. Ideally, what I always like to do is have, if you've got 2 ship, 4 ship, whatever it may be, have each aircraft engage the target from a different direction, and also consider using suppression. So having, if you've got a particularly not heavily defended target, but a target with some level of defence at it, consider having one aircraft pop up, do a Maverick attack to suppress the group, while the second guy goes in and lobs a string of Mark 82s down them, or CBUs, whatever it may be. Use that sort of surprise and suppression to do it. And just in case anyone's wondering, certainly in OGS and other combat scenarios, that is added through scripting, so you can suppress enemy forces.
Long range gun strafe also comes to mind.
Indeed. Medium level, obviously, from that point, again, look at what weapons you've got. If you can do the job with JDAM, so if you've got a fixed target, that isn't going to move, well then you can have 2 jets coming in, rippling JDAMs off, and get out of there relatively quickly. If, however, you've got vehicles that could move, could reposition, well then you're probably better off using GBU-12s and doing, again, try for shooter wherever possible. If you've got 2 jets and the threat environment allows, get both aircraft employing weapons at the same time. It shortens the amount of time you're there. You kill more stuff in a shorter time scale, and that's generally better. However, if the threat environment dictates, by all means, don't be sort of nervous about using the shooter cover, shooter suppressor, kind of tactics. Have that other guy sat there, keeping an eye on the target area while somebody goes in and engages, so that if manpads come up after you pull off target, there's at least someone there to let you know. On that, when it comes to your cover role, the cover guy doesn't have to be in formation. In fact, to be honest, most of the time you're more effective if you're not in close formation with the other guy. If you're sat in cover, 5 miles away at the IP in a racetrack, while the other guy goes in, and you can see the entire ingress, egress target area, you're probably going to be more effective cover than if you're 500 feet off his wing and flying wing. Right, anything else on that? Obviously, it is a massive subject, and it's one of these things that we could talk about for hours and hours and hours. But yeah, anyone got any particular questions they want to run into?
I do have a very specific example I'd like to ask about. I often find myself in a situation where I am tasked or tasking myself to attack a group of targets, let's say 15, a total of 15 vehicles, of which 10 at least have to be degraded or destroyed. What are the options if I want to minimize the number of runs and CBUs are not allowed or not feasible? Because I'm as much as stuff as the agency can carry, I often find myself in a situation where I'm really debating with myself what to use. So are there like rules or guidelines, specific ordinance for specific type of targets?
Not really. It boils down to, I suppose, the weaponeering side of it. So, if you've got heavy armour, for example, that's obviously going to restrict what you can use. Things like Mark 82s, for example, have a limited effect on heavy armour because you've basically got to get a direct hit. So, in that kind of sense, what you're looking at then is basically Maverick and gun. So, what I would probably go with in that sort of situation would be, assuming a 2-ship. 4 Mavericks, gun. You can run in low 88s, obviously quick draw, ripple 8 Mavericks off between 2 jets on one run in. That's 8 targets gone. 1 shooter gun attack, 10 targets bye bye. And you probably never get within half a mile of the target.
All right.
Again, a way, not the way. You could, if the medium altitude environment was available to you, you could switch that for JDAMs. Go in and pickle off 6 JDAMs each, and then 12 targets dead.
And also, as I said earlier, threat environment permitting, do a shooter, not a shooter cover.
Yeah. But ultimately, say for example the threat environment's quite heavy. You haven't got the option to spend, to do more than 1 attack. So all you can do is 1 run in, and you're at low level. Well, okay, yeah, Mavericks again. Do you know what? You ain't gonna get 10. One of the key things to remember is
User joined your channel.
You can have more than 1 group or more than 1 flight attack a target if necessary. What's no good is if 1 flight goes in and both aircraft get shot down because they tried doing too many attacks. Well, then you can't come up and do another attack. So all the time it's better to just accept that you can only take out 4, 6, 8, however many it may be, and then fly home again, rearm, refuel, and go up and do it again, than it is to go, well, okay, we killed 7, but we lost 2 aircraft in the process.
Yeah, but and also you have to recover those 2 pilots, which means it's a mess.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. That answer your question, Oliver?
Yeah, kind of.
Well, do you want? Yeah, well, if you need any more, keep going.
Yeah, also, but maybe in too much detail. What are the options within the Mark 82s? From now on, or for all the time I've been using them, I've just been putting in 75 feet separation and either dropping a stick of 4 or a stick of 6, depending on the rest of the configuration. But is there more to it? Are there more variables that we can take into consideration? Or is DCS that limited that it's basically indeed a stick of 4, a stick of 6? That's it.
Well, I mean, ultimately, you can use the Mark 82s in any way you like. The trouble is, I guess, to a degree, it's difficult to say because we haven't done enough testing yet to determine, for example, that in DCS, the best spacing for a given target is. Real world, what you'll say is, 75 feet might be the ideal spacing for Mark 82s versus a lightly armoured target. For a soft skin target, 150 feet might be might be the best, most effective spacing. For dismounted infantry in the open on smooth terrain like desert, 200 feet might be the ideal spacing. That's kind of the way it works. It's all based on what the target is, what the surroundings of the target are, and how that's going to affect the weapon performance. Obviously, in DCS, we don't know that, and a lot of the variables, like for example fragmentation, etc., aren't modelled. So it is very simplified. So that's one of the reasons that 75-foot spacing is what we use, because, well, frankly, in DCS, that's all you need. But equally, there's nothing wrong with closing that down, for example, and going for, say, 40 feet, if you think that's going to give you a better effect on the target. If you're dealing with armour, so it's point targets, rippling forward at 30 feet might give you a better chance of killing that tank. One thing I will say is, outside of CAS, where you're dealing with soft skin stuff, if you're carrying Mark 82s, get rid of them all in one attack. Just get the lock on. Use what you've got. Be it either ripple pairs or ripple singles, depending on what type of target. If you're dealing with armor, ripple pairs is normally more effective than single. And just make that target go away. There's no point in dropping a stick of 6 Mark 82s, for example, in ripple single 100-foot spacing, if then nothing is even damaged by that string of bombs. Whereas if you drop, the same 6 bombs ripple pair at 30 feet and you kill a tank, well, at least you've killed a tank.
All right.
But obviously, real world, you've got fusing differences. The weapon's going to perform slightly differently depending on the impact angle, impact airspeed. Again, what type of terrain it's impacting. This, that, and the other. None of those factors are applicable to DCS. Right, makes sense, mate?
Yeah, makes sense.
Happy days. Right, anyone else got any others? Nope. Okay. Right. So the last sort of phase of the mission is search the egress. Then, so now we've got in, we've hit our target, we've done what we needed to do, and now we've got to get out again. So at this point, the enemy know we're there. They're probably a bit angry. So at this point, they still want to kill us. So now we're not in the stage where we're trying to sneak in and surprise the enemy. We're trying to get out as quickly as we can, not die, and get back to base. Get to friendly airspace, before we run out of fuel and time, essentially. So, again, to be honest with you, a lot of the considerations are very similar to the Ingress, with the difference, obviously, now that we're not trying to surprise the enemy, we're not trying to sneak through undetected, we're trying to just get home. So, again, range, big factor, and it's same sort of question really as the Ingress planning range. You're looking now at, okay, I've hit the target, am I going to have enough fuel to get back to home plate with what I'm leaving target with? How much fuel do I have to leave the target with? What is my joker? What is my bingo? That kind of thing. There's no point, as I said before, spending 20 minutes flying around the target, killing everything, and then finding that you haven't got enough fuel to get home. So these sort of things, obviously not massive factors in the A10 a lot of the time. It tends to be relatively, happy to sit there and fly around all day. But sometimes if you've got a long range mission at low level, you'd be surprised how quickly that fuel can go. So factor that in. Are you going to need to do a trip to the tanker to make it back to home plate? And it is, if you can't refuel for any reason, does that mean you've got to divert? The threat environment, obviously, you've just been in and killed the enemy. They're probably going to want to try and shoot you down. So what that generally means is now enemy fighters supported by GCI, they are going to have seen you at the target, because chances are you'll have unmasked if you're at low level or you're at medium level or whatever. They now know you're there. They know you're flying out. They're still going to try and hunt you down and kill you. So if that air threat's there, plan your route such that either you're using the terrain to hide from them, you're flying, within friendly air defences, such that you can use the friendly air defence weapon engagement zone as a shield, or you're coordinating / flying towards and under friendly fighters, such that they're providing that shield for you. If you've got if you know, for example, that there's a friendly cap station, 30 miles to the west of your target, well, guess which way you fly on your egress. It might not be directly to home plate, but it gets you, that shield and that protection quickly. That's the kind of thing to think about. Equally, if you're, you could say, for example, your airbase, your home plate is to the southeast, but flying southeast means you've got to fly through 30 miles of enemy airspace, or you could fly northeast, and you've only got to fly through 5 miles of enemy airspace. Again, you go northeast, get into friendly airspace, out of enemy airspace where nothing's going to shoot you, and then you can fly, home. So don't necessarily take the most direct route, as the crow flies. Factor in, again, timing with, other flights. So if you've got escorts, again, make sure you're egressing in such a way that they can still cover you, distance, direction, altitudes, etc. If you're down at, Angel 0 in an A10, zipping along at 300 feet, 300 knots, you're going to make it quite difficult for a escort flight to cover you, because they're not going to be able to see where you are. Remember, real world escort flights don't fly formation with you. They're going to be flying, offset by tens of miles, 10, 20, 30,000 feet above you. Give them that option such that they know pretty much where you are, so they can coordinate with you. Seed flights, if you've got a seed escort, again, same kind of thing. You might have to plan it so that seed flight, again, is escorting you on the way out, so that if anything does pop up immediately and present a threat, they can deal with it. And again, coordination with other packages. Make sure that you don't pick your egress route in the same way as someone else is ingressing. So that you don't conflict. Factor that in. And obviously, routing requirements as well. If we've got air corridors, SAM engagement corridors to deal with, that kind of thing, make sure you follow the airspace restrictions that are in place. Right. Questions, comments, thoughts on that? Happy?
Yep.
Okie dokie. Right then, on to the contingency planning type stuff. So, yeah, this is where, we've briefly mentioned it before, but yeah, this is where we're looking at, what could go wrong. What sort of things do we have to plan and think about? So, obviously, the first one, and generally speaking, certainly for us in the A10, the most scary one is the air-to-air threat. So we're looking at our commit criteria. So commit criteria is, at what point do we say, right, we're not running away anymore, we're in this fight and we're in it to win it. Planning that in advance and saying that, for example, if a MiG-21 closes to within 10 miles of us and is hot, then we are engaged, we turn hot to it, we go into a box formation, a line formation, whatever it may be, depending on how many of you are in the flight, and we try and kill them before they kill us. Yeah, that's what commit criteria is about. It's setting up those conditions that say, now we are in the fight and we are going to kill them. We're not going to be a victim, we're going to be the guy they're scared of. Even if you don't shoot them down, what you might do is prevent them from engaging you and shooting you down. I can assure you, from a fighter pilot point of view, if you've got 4 A-10s flying straight towards you, lobbing AIM-9s at you, it's going to give you a few problems at the very least. Obviously, alongside that, and again, one thing we mentioned before, your jettison criteria. At what point are you going to say, right, we are jettisoning weapons because we're either going to try and run away or we're going to try and engage? Abort criteria, again, same kind of thing. If a certain threat presents itself, we are going to turn around and we're going to go home. If you're going up against a flight of 4 MiG-29s on a sweep mission and you're 2 A-10s, trying to press on with your mission is probably not a clever idea. Abort, go home, get out of there, come back another day when they're not there.
Would you call that a suicide?
Yeah. Egress plan, again, if that air-to-air threat presents itself at various points in the mission, how are you going to get out? How are you going to run away from them and escape from them? And also, what supporting assets are available to you? Where are the friendly SAMs? Where are those friendly missile engagement zones that you can hide in? Where are the friendly fighters? Be they caps, be they escort flights, be they sweeps, even friendly strike air-to-ground mission fighters that can provide support if needs be. On surface to air, basically the same kind of things. Obviously you're not necessarily going to deal with commit criteria because you're not going to engage your SAM necessarily. But what you are going to do is have a look at jettison criteria. You're going to have your abort criteria. Again, aborting. If there is an SA-10 WES covering your target that you didn't know about, well, guess what? That means you're not going to that target. Can you get to the secondary target? Okay, we're going to the secondary. Can we get to the if you can't get to the secondary target, again, mission abort, go home. Again, egress plan, same as above. How are you going to do that? How are you going to achieve that at various points of the mission? If something unforeseen happens, what are you going to do? Are you going to try and fly to the directly east because it gets you out of there as quickly as possible, or are you just going to fly your route home? Are you going to just reverse your flight path and go back? Those kind of variations. Again, what supporting assets are available to you? Is there a SEAD escort flight, SEAD strikes that you can call on to provide support if needed? Aircraft faults and battle damage. Again, if something goes wrong during your egress, if one of you has a random failure, for example, or one of you takes a burst of AAA that you weren't expecting on the ingress, what is going to define whether you press on or whether you abort? If you lose, I don't know, some random system, say you lose an MFD, does that prevent you from accomplishing your mission? If it doesn't, because you're on a low-level mission with Mark 82s, well, no, I can still carry on. So carry on then. You deal with that an MFD. If, however, you're on a medium altitude, JDAM paveway mission where you need, the TGP and you need, the TAD and all this kind of stuff. Say you're on a CAS sortie, then it may well be a mission abort. Likewise, if you get some battle damage, close to the target, are you going to immediately abort if you take a couple of rounds through the wing and there's no apparent fault, or are you going to press on? Again, question. Who knows? It's going to depend on the target, the priority of the target, etc. Egress route. Obviously now you're dealing with battle damage, so you might have an aircraft that is down on performance. Say, for example, if you lost an engine, how are you going to deal with that? Is that going to affect which route you choose to egress? You may now, for example, not be able to do a direct, flight to home plate if that means you've got to fly over mountains. You might have to go round. Factor that in. Emergency diverts as well. So you'll have your planned alternate airfield. So, okay, if for any reason we can't land at home plate because, the runway's fouled, weather, whatever, we'll go to this divert field. Now you're looking at emergency diverts. So the closest airfield, for example, could be, because you had an engine fire, whatever, it might be land as soon as possible. So where are you going to do that? Think about that kind of stuff in advance. Try and plan, different points on the route. Okay, at waypoint 2, I divert is going to be home plate. At waypoint 4, I divert is going to be Batumi. Think about that kind of stuff. And then obviously CSAR. If, for example, we are flying a campaign mission where that is an option, and we have, CSAR planning effect, we have like the 132nd doing that sort of stuff, excuse me, plan, are you going to communicate that? Is lead going to, or the lead or whichever aircraft's left, can broadcast on guard, etc., etc. Are you going to orbit the crash site? That kind of thing. And then for the more routine stuff, yeah, divert fields, kind of obviously what I've already gone into, but yeah, in case of airfield attack, where are you going to land? In case the weather comes in, where are you going to land? In case you've got an emergency, where are you going to land? Right, any questions, comments, thoughts, or anything people want expanding on, or anything to add?
Nope.
Okay. Right then, so I think on to the last bit then, the flight planning tools. So this bit I just wanted to add, sort of go through and talk about how I've done a lot of the planning I've done in the past and sort of the things we use. Obviously at the moment we're all pretty familiar with Google Earth and how that's useful to us. The problem with Google Earth is it's great for the knitter. It's brilliant for the NTCR because the theatre matches very closely real life. You know, buildings and towns are where they're supposed to be, roads are where they're supposed to be, you know, mountains are where they're supposed to be, that sort of thing. Once you start getting into the Caucasus, however, things start to change. You know, over the Caucasus, there will be a town in DCS that isn't there in real life, so it isn't on Google Earth. Equally, there'll be a town on Google Earth because it's a massive city in real life, like, for example, Tbilisi. In DCS, it's a tiny little place with only a few buildings, and none of the buildings are where they are in reality. So there's only a limited amount of planning you can do. You can use Google Earth for the Caucasus, but you've got to be careful. For example, if you mouse over and get your MGRS grid and think, okay, well that MGRS grid is a bridge, you can probably pretty much guarantee that once you get in DCS, not only will there not be a bridge there might not even be a river there. Because the coordinates will be like, 2 miles off, and that bridge and that river, if it's there at all, will be, a couple of miles to the south or the east or the west, for example. So you can use it, and you can use it to get a rough essay, but you're not going to get, that precision level of detail that you're used to in the knitter. However, for theatres in the future, like for example, when we eventually get straight up for moves, things like that, or whatever else comes down the line, chances are, much like the knitter, it will work very well. Right, so the other option we've got is the mission editor itself. Again, this is one of these things where you're always thinking outside the box to a degree. But for example, in Georgian Storm, we're based at Vaziani. We know where all these target areas are off to the west. So you, for example, know that your target is at Poti, and it's just on the southern end of Poti. You open up the mission editor. Now, obviously, you're not going to see the target in the mission editor, but what you can do is move the mouse around, and at the bottom, see the grid references. So what you can do is move the mouse around and go, I want to put my IP there on that bridge. Well, that's the grid ref for that bridge. Write it down on your MDC. That's what you plug into the jet. That's how you work it. The other thing you can do is use just placing an aircraft. It doesn't really matter what aircraft, but you place an aircraft at the airfield, and then you just set up waypoints on that aircraft where you want your waypoints to be in the mission you're flying, and that allows you to do things like measure the distance of the flight. You can go into the options on the mission editor and say, okay, that flight route is 350 miles. Oh, that's a bit long. Maybe I want to change that because I'm going to run out of fuel. That kind of thing. And that's generally what I tend to do for missions like OGS. You can get a bit of intel, a bit of planning, stuff like that, with accurate coordinates doing that way. You can plan routes that will fly you through valleys, take you around, things like that. Obviously, you're not going to have anything from the mission, so you're not going to see threats. You're not going to see, friendly units even. You're just going to have an empty map, but it gives you something useful at least. Another option along the similar kind of thing is the F10 map. You jump on the dedicated server. You go to the F10 map, and now you see, the theatre. You'll see friendly forces, Blue 4 units. If Fog of War is enabled, you might see some enemy units. Again, that's how I've worked OGS in the past. Especially with use of UAVs, etc. You can have, some of the enemy groups showing up on the map that allows you to plan for them and select targets that way as well. Now, again, you can use the mouse, just get the coordinates. You can get the terrain elevation. You can use the ruler to measure out distances from a point and say, okay, the target's there. I want my IP to be, 10 miles to the south. Okay, ruler, measure 10 miles, find a nice point. That's going to be my IP. Obviously, what it doesn't allow you to do is put dummy flights down, so you can't measure distances directly and stuff like that. You have to sort of do a bit of guesstimation, scientific wild-ass guesswork with the ruler and things like that if you want to do that. And obviously, the last tool to bear in mind is definitely very useful, especially once you start dealing with combat sorties and especially things like OGS when tankers aren't available, is the fuel planning tool that Kimmy's made. It really does help you work out not only how much fuel you need, but whether or not you can even get there. And it's also quite useful, and it allows you to work out timing, so you can tell how long it's going to take you to get to a given point, how long it's going to take you to get back, how much fuel you've got over target, how much time over target you've got, and then you can sort of use all that information to start feeding into your attack tactics. How much time you're going to spend over target, what weapons you're going to use. If you spend all this time planning to find that, okay, I've actually only got 10 minutes of fuel over target, well then that is obviously going to limit what it is that you can do there. Okay, so that is the end of my little presentation. After that point, I kind of ran out of things to particularly say. So, has anybody got any thoughts, comments, questions, points, ideas, or things they want to talk about?
Possibly the most useless time I've spent with the entire group. No, it was awesome.
No, I think from what I've heard you say, a lot of no, I shouldn't say a lot of points, but some points were already obvious to me. Some are almost entirely new. So I'm likely going to translate your presentation in a sort of checklist to use for myself if I plan a sortie. Might share that. If more people have the same thought, feel free to let me know, and we can work together on it to set up sorties with taking all aspects in mind.
I think from my perspective, I remember the first time I had a part of this conversation, which was fairly ad hoc. I'm sure you remember, Eddie, we turned it into a YouTube video, which was after Zero and I guess a couple of years ago now, went and did a bunch of really dumb things in the AO, and then, where Eddie kind of sat back and watched, and then afterwards it was like, well, why'd you do that? And I think the best thing about sessions like this is, and especially for the new guys, it's a lot of information, and you're probably not going to retain it all, and that's okay, because ultimately you're going to get in the situation, and you actually hear it in Oliver's questions, right? Like, you get to this spot where you're like, well, what should I do in this situation? Oh, I understand this, and you get to the point of not understanding, and then I think it's good because it hopefully that turns into discussions on the forums and questions and tactics. Again, this is a really good way to kind of, some training wheels, but I think you definitely evolve with more experience, and you get more questions, and you think about things more clever. And hopefully we're discussing tactics. You come up with a clever way to do something in a given scenario, and we discuss tactically the merits of that. So it's a very much a living thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, just to slightly expand on, what I was saying before about using the mission editor. So, again, I've put a little group in here just to sort of combine, mission editor F10 map. So, as you see, I don't know if you can you see the bottom of the screen with the grids on?
Yes.
Yep.
So, literally, okay, you're in the F10 map, for example, on OGS. You've got the UAV flying up and down that's showing all these red groups to you. Okay, you have a look around. Oh, there's a red group there. That's an armoured group. Right, mouse on it. Well, that's its grid reference right there. Write that down. That's your target grid. Job done. Obviously, 10-digit grids, yeah, not a lot of point, because you can almost guarantee that group will have moved a little bit by the time you get there. So don't go wasting time, writing down 10-digit grids just to fly in there and pickle JDAMs on them, because that ain't going to work. But what you can do is go, okay, centre of the group, 6-digit grid. Right, job done. Right then, so now what we can do is ruler. And we just sort of go, okay, I'm going to put an IP, I don't know, 3 miles off, because I'm going to go for a gun attack. There you go, bridge. That's a good IP. 2 bridges on a little spit of land there. Spot on. Perfect. And then from there, obviously, you know, you can have a quick look around and see if there's any threat groups. Like, for example, you've got the that little was it SA-13 battery there. Obviously, you can, if you've got the group shown up on the map, you know, on the F10 map, you can work out what's there. You know, you can have a bit of an intel, and then you can sort of go back and say, okay, my IP is going to be there. So, how about, you know, we ingress in and we come in from behind this hill. You know, so we come through there. That's going to take us to our IP, and we're going to be terrain masked right up to the point we hit sort of there. You know, okay. So then we sort of track it back, and this is how I tend to work it. I'll find the target first, and then the ingress route I'll generally plan backwards. So from the target to the IP, you know, to the pre-IP if there's going to be one, to the contact point, you know, and then to the ingress route. You know, so all the way through Kashiri, Gori, you know, Makrani, back to Vaziani. And then from there, you know, once you've got your target, you do the opposite and go, okay, egress route. So let's come off target that way, head out away from the target a bit, and then we'll drop down below this hill, you know, and then progress down, you know, past Sanaki, and then boom, we're over the mountains and we're flying home. You know, so the other thing, as you know, as I said, placing aircraft and just doing that. So you know, throw a jet down. Doesn't matter what you do with it. Add waypoints. And now what we do is we just click around the map. Okay, so we'll put our first waypoint there, second one there, second one there. That's good. What we're going to do is we're going to fly through here. So we'll do this nice valley. Don't necessarily need to put the waypoints in that you're actually going to plug into the jet either. I'll say that. You know, if you want to measure accurately the distance, then you know, put however many waypoints you need in to do that. So we'll go up here, fly this way. Where was our IP? That was there, wasn't it? Target there. Okay, and then you look on your map on the editor. You just click there. All of a sudden, right, range 153 miles, route length 164 miles. Job done. So now you know you can go into the 3-3. Okay, how much fuel on average do you consume at low level? You know, right, times that by 164. That's how much fuel we need to get to the target. You know, we're going to fly back at medium level. Okay, how far's that? Plug through it. You know, 150 miles for argument's sake. Okay, how much fuel is that going to use at medium level on average? That much, right? Okay, that gives us X at the target to burn off. Right, job done. You know, does that sort of make sense now? What I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. As I say, it's, you know, it's a way. It's not the way. You don't have to do it, but it's what I've always done to, you know, it's using what few tools are available in DCS. You know, you don't have to be a mission editor expert to do this. All you're doing is adding one aircraft on a blank mission. You know, clicking a few waypoints around. You know, using the mouse to get your grid references, your terrain altitudes, etc. And then, yeah, writing them down on a piece of paper. And then you just you put them on the mission data card, and then you bug them in the jet when you get in the cockpit. Anyone got any more sort of questions on that stuff?
Hey Eddie, in the 476, the missions, like these different categories, ATO assigned group, assigned location, on call, pilot selected group, pilot selected location, does it tend to run the whole gamut of these categories?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I mean, what you'll find is, you know, for example, when I do OGS, one of the things I'll tend to do is I will say, as part of the briefing, you know, here are the priority targets. Right, so this, and this. Basically, pretty much for OGS is that list I put up in this presentation. And then what I will do as part of the initial intel brief that I give when the mission goes live is say, you know, there are enemy forces holding Kutaisi City. You know, there is this unit, you know, the blah armoured battalion, whatever, armoured brigade, whatever it is, you know, holding Poti. You know, ground commander's intent is to assault Kutaisi within the next 48 hours. You know, 476 aircraft are tasked with engaging, you know, hostile ground forces in this area. And then I will, you know, maybe list 2 or 3 pre-brief targets with, you know, type and grid reference. So then that's your sort of ATO pre-planned stuff. Obviously, it's part of, say, a flight night. You know, say 81st flight night, for example. You know, whoever's planning it might say, okay, we've got 8 guys. We're going to do 4 2-ships. You know, 1 2-ship's going to attack this target. 1 2-ship's going to attack this target. Another one this one. Another one this one. So then, you as a pilot joining that flight or as a flight lead, you're then sort of doing a pre-planned target planning, so you know what your target is, you're going to go off and do it. If, however, you're that guy planning the flight night, or for example, you're just going up and flying on a Wednesday night because you've got the time and why not, you're then sort of looking at your pilot selecting a target, if you know what I mean. You're looking around on the map, in the briefing material. You might go, okay, well, the briefing said there's loads of enemy forces around Poti. Well, I'm just going to plan a flight from the south, and I'm going to go to Poti. I'm going to put my target waypoint there, and yeah, I'm just going to see what I can find and kill whatever I see. That makes sense?
Yep.
Very good.
Cool. So yeah, basically, I mean, obviously for you guys, the newer guys who've never done OGS, but I think actually it's quite a lot of people actually now. Hopefully next few weeks it'll be up and running again for a while. We'll see. What essentially the way to think of it essentially is a a campaign. It's not so much a mission. It's not kind of thing where we launch a mission, go fly it, and then land, and then take the server down. That's not how we do things. So our combat scenarios tend to run the same way as the NTTR mission runs. It'll run on the DS constantly for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We might bring it down to restart the server, save the progress, make a few tweaks and put the mission up. But, excuse me, same kind of deal. You stick a flight on the ops board, you find your target, you go up, you go kill it, and then the next day when you go fly, that target you killed yesterday is still dead.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the way we do it. But what you might find, of course, is in the meantime, things will have moved, because some sneaky person might have gone in the ground commander in Combined Arms and moved some stuff around. So that group that you just took out 50% of might have retreated a bit, or if you, as I say, if you took out all the tanks and just left the air defences, those air defences might have moved off and gone to protect another group. Or if it was a high priority location for the enemy, they might have brought other reinforcements in. They might have brought another group driving down. But of course, all those groups have got to drive across the map in real time. So there's nothing to say you as a flight couldn't be doing a kill box engagement and find a group that's moving across the terrain and take them out before they get there.
Yeah, you're basically doing a dynamic campaign manually.
Yeah, essentially. That's what we try and do, yeah. So obviously all we're doing as part of the knitter is just training for that. So, right. Anyone got any other thoughts, questions, comments, etc.?
Nope, not right now.